Thanks, comrades. I must put in an apology that our work with Eskom is not that enhanced. So, with the permission of the chair, I'll talk about mining, and there will be references to coal, but generally how we see our work and what we think, how it may inform this process. Yeah, so I work for a faith-based NGO called the Benchmarks Foundation. We have many different arms to it. One part of it is community monitors, where people live in these areas who document on a daily basis, to document, to criticize, and look for alternatives, the impact of mining on their lives. So over the years we've trained hundreds of people in these communities. If I have to explain the mining sector, which for a long time was the creator of the modern capitalism that we have, gave rise to manufacturing and other industries, it will take up all my time. Let me say, our work is not for the mining sector, but looking at the impact of mining on poor people, particularly those living around the mines, mining-affected communities. And today is quite a big day for some of us in the media, because the mining charter has been released, which is just a reflection of how mining communities are excluded from decision making. I mean, Gwen and Natasha has a certain way of doing things, which I'm not so sure whether we wish for the irrational capitalism of the Zuma era or the rational exploitation of the Mantashe era. And we really don't know what is it that we want. But anyhow, so as a small primer for people, on the 22nd of August, the Human Rights Commission released a report that it's been working on for 2 years, and we put a lot of pressure that it come out. It's called the impact of mining on mining-impacted communities. It's quite a good report. They've got a user-friendly version and one that's about 55 pages. Why I like it in particular, it serves as a template, serves as a basic understanding of the main issues in the mining sector as it affects poor communities. We gave a lot of evidence there. So there's a section, 2 pages in the summary on water, there are different kinds of things like that. The area of our work that we're trying to do and that I've been trying to create an interest in is around water use licenses. Right? But let me just say, the overall work that we do is trying to build the power of community groups, using the knowledge that they have, sharpening in some of the areas where they want to. One part of it is the monitoring school. Other parts are, some people form community organizations, and the real aim for building this power is to challenge the power of the corporation and its collusion, the collusion of our government with these corporations. Now, I think how water comes into this discussion, if you look at the mining community, the Anglo-American and others, it's not uncommon when they relocate to a community, like one of the communities where I spent some time, they relocate to a community which has running water, they put them in a township situation, they then create this factory, mine, enterprise there, which then brings us into conflict with the workers, because now we are seemingly anti-mining. But the original sin was they removed poor people, put them in a township setup, where 90-odd houses are there in Mukhabari, and the community has managed to survive for 15, 16 years by some of the leaders doing what they do, managing more or less to keep some sense of unity. And then the corporation brings in different tactics. One stage they were against some of our leaders. Another stage they say you cannot have meetings without the Queen Mother. So this is Anglo. They can be anything. They can be very progressive, or they can be very royal if it suits them. At the end of the day, they had made a lot of promises to community. So what we find in our overall set of our work is that when we get communities coming to us, very rarely do they come before mining starts. Then at least we can organize. There are some cases, and I'll tell you the impacts of that. But often we are on the back foot now trying to defend the community where mines already started, false promises have been made. And the difficulty we have to negotiate with organized labor is that often they talk about decent work in it, and they really don't worry about the prior sins, because and how we mediate that is an issue. But let me give you an example of the second issue that I want to talk about. In the Rustenburg area, I was working with Vuyo mining communities, which is one of the groups that emerged from work we've done with them. And we requested mining licenses from about 5 corporations. I wrote the letter and I said I'm mandated by the community and I make sure that everyone's copied there. And you know how the company responded? Like this. Not like this, like this. Told us to go, didn't even reply. So in my letter I said, in the interest of transparency, I'm copying the Department of Water and Sanitation, but I'm also copying the South African Human Rights Commission, who at that time were the custodians of the prior legislation. Now this is the point I want to raise, and why I sometimes sound like I'm finicky, maybe a bit more, is that I find some of the NGOs use lawyers too much in this struggle. Now I think there's a place for them, but I think that the battle for using high-paying lawyers is not our terrain, because they're going to overturn that fight. They're far more lawyers than us. And working with the Human Rights Commission, I was surprised. They called up the Department of Water and Sanitation, but I've been working with them 5 years, and I can actually vouch that they're turning a corner. They called up the head, or the deputy head of litigation, or whatever, legal services, and asked them for the license, for these water use licenses. And the woman says, why didn't you tell us? Why did you write to other people? I said, well, I wrote to the Water Use License Department. So the Human Rights Commission were incredibly good. They said, okay, let's go to your website. You see, even here, this number is wrong, this is wrong. I mean, just everything is wrong, because they don't think activists or poor people will actually try to check out together. But if you use a lawyer and pay a lot of money, after a long time you may get. And yeah, woe and behold, after 10 days or so, we had 5 water use licenses. But at that meeting, we said to her, when you do something, we want you to do workshops with people, because we don't understand this kind of mumbo jumbo. She was quite good about how you can use water use licenses, there's whole tactics around that. When I wrote to her, I think she probably thought she was being bullied by us in those meetings, but she was quite nice in the meeting. She gave one-liner answer by saying, sorry, we don't have a budget to travel. Which is something that the Chamber of Mines, renamed now as the Minerals Council, also confirmed. The Department of Water and Sanitation, so that the way they undermine rights is simply say they have no budget. Which is true, they have no budget. So I wrote back to say, well, I'm going to write to the portfolio committee to say that we are closing you, you have no budget to do this kind of work, and therefore I want the portfolio committee to come and give you a budget. You said, you don't have to do it, we'll come down. But the truth of it is that they provided the documents. Of course, if we want to spend time reading them, we will get sense out of them. But the idea was that they come to the community and explain to the community of how they are managing the water use in terms of the license, and indicate what the powers that are contained therein to withdraw a license. Because you have no water, you can't do mining. So, I mean, I think that this level of fight is quite deep. We are still continuing with it. Let me just, in my last 3 minutes, I think mining makes profits because they externalize costs. Right? The damages to communities, the pain, the pollution. We've done many studies, which we call the policy gap studies, where we talk about how people have pulmonary illnesses, respiratory illnesses, etc. In the release, snake parking is our second last study we did. So we've recorded those, and we play the center quite okay while we're building the power for communities to kind of fight there. Let me tell you that where I think some things have to be done, we're doing some things okay. There are 8 NGOs. I hope Earth Life is still here. We signed up to try and oppose the Indian conglomerate who are trying to use the water in Pumalanga. You guys part of that? Or groundworks, yeah. There are some groups there are like endangered wildlife, etc. So initially it was giving political support to those groups. I raised the issue in the last meeting that we were at. I was a bit embarrassed when I heard that the corporation and its BE partners had mobilized the community to come protest against Center for Environmental Rights while leading this, because they want jobs. So the issue that I was raising about how we get our message across. Now, even if we do the work deeper, and yeah, I think we can do it more deeper. We didn't do it as deep as we should. Only the other day I put on what the 8 NGOs demand on our website. Right? Now, sometimes we're asked to sign on comrades. At the end of the day, that when people are hungry, it's easy to manipulate that hunger against us. That is the real advertising why our project doesn't work. Our project doesn't look attractive, not because our ideas are not correct. Our project doesn't look attractive because the daily advertisement, the lure of these things give you a better life, the car, the woman on the car, whatever else, right? We don't have those kind of things. Our projects we don't have a transitional strategy that can make people eat while we're fighting. So it's the kind of discussion that we're trying to have. So comrades, I'm going to say one more thing and then I think you should ask me questions about this. What is clearly needed, and I think the idea around this charter and that how we use it, and if it's a signpost, if it's a mobilizing, organizing tool to get people around, we need to get the different traditions around. We shouldn't do what some of the groups are trying to do, is to build this as a franchise. You know, it's not a franchise of the struggle. Okay, we can have different approaches to it, the spiritual and others, but we have to build this movement with all its complexities and give the space for us to keep each other accountable and grow together. Thanks.
You got to present, right? Red light is on. The white light. Yeah, it's coming on. Yeah, it's coming up. You can see the amount.
Good afternoon, comrades. I greet you all in the presence of the Lord. Yeah, I always feel nervous. I've done several of these things, but each time I always feel nervous. So please work with me. Alright, my name is Thando, Lukuko's surname. I work for Project 90 by 2030. We are a social and environmental justice movement based in Cape Town, and we focus primarily on energy and climate change issues. Today, this is just a quick agenda. I'm going to try and keep it within the 10-minute time frame. But yeah, that's just a quick agenda. We'll be discussing just the challenges that mining communities face, the challenges that some of us are familiar with, or rather that we're all familiar with as related to Eskom, and then we'll go into some opportunities and then the way forward. So, most of us are very familiar with mining affected communities, having listened to the presentations that have come prior. The question, though, that I believe we need to ask is how resilient are communities? Most of the time, you know, specifically related to mining communities and as it relates to coal, what we see is that, as we've seen in the RRP, as we heard again this morning, South Africa has got the serious hunger for coal and wanting to develop the coal infrastructure and continue to use it in the future. The impact of this, as we know, is that it increases our demand for water quite drastically for the washing and for other processes within the energy generation component, as well as then the challenges that come with coal as it relates to transportation. So specifically, if we're looking at the food and food sovereignty, in the corridors where you know, where coal is being transported from the mine, let's say, to the power station, in many of these corridors, we also find that there's also food production which takes place within the same routes. In some cases, some of those major routes are used for food and then for coal trucks as well. So there's the impacts that come from the transportation or the vehicles rather running up and down the road, the infrastructure, negative impact on the road infrastructure as a result of all the trucks moving up and down. We've seen, I remember seeing in Malaheni one time, in fact not one time, but several times, the number of coal trucks which fall over, especially because having worked in that sector, the trucks never stop working, they work 24 hours a day. So in many instances, a lot of the accidents which take place in the night. And so at that time, most of us are sleeping, but these trucks are operating, and when they crash, they happen to crash right where the food is being produced. So you find that by the time we wake up to be able to respond to these things, some damage has already been done, especially in winter or in areas where it rains quite heavily. And so one of the other challenges as it relates to water then is AMD, acid mine drainage. For the crops that people need in communities, especially subsistence communities where the communities are reliant on their own agricultural activities for their sustenance, where there are mines around there, we've seen, as the evidence suggests, that acid mine drainage becomes very prevalent in those areas, which has a direct impact on the quality of food and the yield that these farming communities are going to be able to receive. And then also, the poor air quality. I know that there's the draft, I think it's the draft bill, just out for comment now on air quality. We as Project 90 just made some comments, sorry. Yeah. But generally, so part of the work that I do, obviously I work in several communities, and I was working in the East Rand for the last 2.5 years. In wintertime, and some of you guys might know, in wintertime in a lot of the townships, they use coal to be able to heat their homes up. They use coal to be able to cook in some cases. What you find then is when you drive into these communities, there's coal, I want to call it ash, or there's smog, or smoke, or whatever you want to call it, which basically just sits above the entire settlements, just above the housing. It just sits there and rests there. You're there, me coming from Cape Town and I visit these areas, sometimes I feel my skin begin to get itchy because I imagine all of this pollution is now sitting on me, and it makes me wonder then in these communities that are exposed to these areas, including things like tailings dams, for example, as a result of the gold mines, all of these have very negative impacts on the air quality in the townships around these areas. And so in much of the way we look at when moving towards a development of a charter, we need to then speak to some of these realities. How are the things that we're going to be addressing going to respond to the issues around hunger, to unemployment, to other social issues which can happen as a result of mining activities taking place? As we know in several of the other mining communities, in mining areas, where there's a new mine that's coming in, some mines opt to bring in labor which they've used, let's say, in a previous mine which is now closed down. So they'll take those people, put them in a new area, and then in this new area, all of a sudden, we now have social tensions because there are people in these communities who have the skills to be able to do some of these things, some of this work. Or there are people in these areas who need the livelihoods, who need those skills and those jobs to be able to do to feed their families. But as a result of these mines just doing what they please, there's a whole lot of tension which arise. There's gender-based violence which comes in, particularly violence against women and children which take place. There's some of it is as a result of drinking. There are certain communities where there's a serious spike in drinking and sex and other such, what do you call them? Other such behaviors, social behaviors, which have a negative impact on the community as a whole. In some communities, you know, because they're rural or they are very far off from the urban areas, they don't quite feel those impacts of, for example, gender-based violence up until some of these things take place, until some of these guys come in from, let's say, Lipalele, moving into another area, for example. Of course, then there's always the impacts around health, the respiratory diseases, non-communicable diseases, which take place as a result, again, of some of the activities, as a result of the environments that people are in. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the unemployment. When we look at the challenges that are facing Eskom, the three key ones, at least for me and for the purposes of this presentation that I want to highlight on, are the coal supply challenges that Eskom as an entity is facing, the infrastructure challenges that they're facing, and then the leadership issues. Although the leadership issues, I would like to argue, go broader than Eskom itself as an organization. And I mean, if you look at the political climate that we're in, we find that, you know, the political leadership that we have at the moment leaves a lot to be desired. I was reading a 2004 minutes of, I think it was a DMR meeting that they had in Parliament on the PMG website, where the chairperson was, the chairperson of Eskom at the time, Ben Martins, was providing feedback. And what they asked him was, in this entire thing, was one of the questions they asked him was, does he think that the process of transformation is a political process? To which he responds, yes. And so, if we've got such a person, and there's a belief, I mean, he's there as an ANC member, if there's a belief that transformation in itself is a political process, for me, is you know, leaves me a little bit uneasy, because then it means it only lasts 5 years up until then the next regime comes in, and then the direction changes. So what happens in those kinds of environments, you know, where you sit with this minister? I mean, you look at the energy situation between last year and this year. How many times our energy minister changed? Each time the energy minister changed, he needs to be schooled around what activities have been taking place, which pushes things back. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. All right. So I won't go into too much detail again about some of the other things. But then again, around the poor quality coal, we've now read again in the news that coal, Eskom is facing challenges again with coal. They're saying that I think about 10 of their power stations are at around 20 days worth of coal life, sitting and waiting. So there's an imminent coal crisis that's coming again on the shores of South Africa. In some of the conversations I've had with people who are working at the nuclear site, there are the challenges around the maintenance there, because of the poor management by the leadership, the lack of funds that existed in Eskom, there are no components to be able to maintain some of the systems properly. And the backlog for some of these things is 6 months. So that means we're sitting in a period where, you know, Eskom cannot continue to operate in the way that it's operating. There's certain information, I mean, some of the stuff that I'm saying that I know about is off the record because it's had conversations, but, you know, the lack of information and the lack of clarity and openness and transparency around some of the challenges that Eskom as an organization is facing make it very difficult to begin to plan for the transformation and how things need to progress moving forward. There's also another big one is just to highlight is just that municipalities owe Eskom around 30 billion. So the reason I put that in there is because a lot of the services that we expect from our local government are supplemented, or in part the monies for those particular services come from the revenues generated from electricity sales. But with the decrease in electricity sales, the demand, municipalities are no longer able to service their communities and areas. So that also begins to question now, does Eskom continue to have a place in the society? Just some opportunities, and then I've got 2 more slides after this. Just some opportunities. Some of the work that we're doing as Project 90 is to begin to engage with particularly local authorities and mining companies around what their social and labor plans are. The opportunities, I mean, because we're in such a crisis with Eskom, with climate change, with water, we can't deny the fact that there are opportunities that are present in a crisis situation. Those opportunities are different for us as civil society organizations as compared to a for-profit company. However, there are still opportunities that exist. So for example, social plans. Those social plans just state that how are the funds generated from mining activities going to feed back into the municipality? How could those funds be used to rehabilitate mines, to provide services to people that need them? So things like healthcare, things like providing access to electricity. As we know, some of the communities around mining-affected areas, don't have access to electricity themselves. There's a colleague who mentioned free, prior, and informed consent, which is basically going to a community and asking about, can we come in and do certain work? Yes, we might need it, but we still need to be able to be there and ask so that we can get their level of participation and their buy-in into some of the processes. In many instances, in the communities that I've worked with, the projects, especially infrastructure projects, have been stopped midway because the community does not know what is taking place and always feel as if they don't have a sense of ownership in the project, so therefore nothing is done, nothing for them is done without them, and things come to an end. Lastly, I think the biggest opportunity that we are facing at the moment is we need to capitalize on that land debate. We need to be able to capitalize it because fundamentally the land debate answers the question, who makes the final decision on land? If we're talking about, for example, water resources in a particular community, right, and mining activities are going to divert those water resources from livelihoods into towards mining activities, surely then in the discussion of land, these things are important questions that need to be able to come up. So when you look at the examples, for example, of what happened in Naledi, those kinds of activities shouldn't be taking place, the kinds of violence that's taking place in Naledi, because these people have said they don't want these mines, but because the mine is adamant that they want to mine, they're going to go and destruct. So the more we are able to formalize a structured conversation around what we want South Africa to look like in a space where everybody has got access to electricity, has got access to water, we need to be able to factor in that conversation about the land. And our responsibility as the organization sitting here is to be able to begin those conversations in our small little quarters. So whether you're working in Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, it doesn't matter where you are, you need to start speaking about how do we want our problems to look, and then as we work together to try and coordinate our efforts, we're then looking at, as a South Africa, as a country, how does this then look and roll out. So as Project 90 then, in terms of a way forward, how we've addressed some of these issues is we've, together with other organizations, we're very much active in the just energy transition, where we're trying to agitate for there to be a plan that comes up which speaks around the issues of jobs, livelihoods, the water, for example, between different stakeholders, so your government stakeholders, your union stakeholders, civil society, and any other interested and affected stakeholders would form part of that. The second way forward is that there is not enough public education and awareness that we can do around all of these issues. And I believe that as the organizations that we are and the work that we do, we have a responsibility to keep providing as much information and awareness, education and awareness around these issues as possible. I particularly enjoy media and the power of the media. And specifically, I would like to go to community radio and community newspapers. What I've seen is, specifically as it relates to the people that I work with, my target audience, Business Day and Mail and Guardian are very respectable publications. They've got their place. However, there's also the place for some of your people, what do you call these newspapers? The Voice, other newspapers, and The Sun, for example, because these newspapers have got reach. The people that we're speaking about, mining-affected communities, aren't reading Mail and Guardian, they aren't reading Cape Times, they aren't reading some of these other publications. What they're reading when you look at the train, when you look at the taxi, is The Voice, is the Daily Sun, and some of these other publications. Community radio, Radio Bonella, etc., etc. And then lastly, we've got to be able to build the capacity of community activists, community leaders, to be to build participatory democracy, we've got to be able to build active citizenry. So as Project 90, how we've addressed that particular part is we've got a project where we're trying to build participatory democracy through the development of a curriculum which looks at 3 key factors. We're looking at local government engagement, because that's the main interface that communities have with power. The second one is social accountability. Accountability is probably the biggest challenge that we have in this country when it comes to our leaders. And being able to look at the numbers will give you a very good idea and a lot of information around what is it that the government is prioritizing beyond the rhetoric that they publish. And then also the last one is then around campaigning, which is just basically to draw their attention to the activities that the various organizations are going to be doing in order to build this participatory democracy. Get people participating in IGP meetings. Get people engaging with the authorities about what is it that they need. The Thandos of this world and others who do similar work can't be everywhere. Can't be everywhere. But we do have the possibility to be able to say, let me teach one person or one organization that is mandated to go back to their CBO and provide that information back. Because if they aren't mandated, what reason does he have to go back and speak to his community about the information that they've received? And so these are the ways in which we're going about doing it, and mainly through providing support of a financial nature, technical nature, and for me, most importantly, of an emotional nature, because in these environments, we undermine or we underplay the importance of the emotional trauma that some communities go through in their plight to try to gain better access and try to participate in this democracy. And yeah, that was it from me. Thank you very much.
Vuyo. Just to say, Hameeda, are you here?
She's on her way.
She sent a message to us saying she was stuck in this protest, right?
But she's still coming.
She's still coming,
So
yeah.
she'll...
Yeah.
Which one? The last
Could you
one?
put on the lights, please? Vuyo? Huh?
Accommodation.
Accommodation is there. Put the lights on for her, please, there. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Good stuff.
Yes, comrades.
Yes, you. Yes. Hameeda, come to the front, please. You keep me the chair warm.
Straight in the house.
It's like an orientation to Joburg, all on its own.
We heard about the protest, so your apology has been given.
Hello.
Vuyo, over you too.
Yes. Comrades, I'm not going to say much about and around the issue of the mining affected communities. But I mean, I think Comrades Lukuko has touched that a lot, as well as the Comrades Hassen. But basically, to say that the issues affecting mine affected communities is a very serious issue, and it comes from mining, and including in that mining is coal, which is used by Eskom excessively, as we have seen in the presentation we had this morning. And as a union, we have an issue because the lives and livelihoods and the health of our people, particularly in Mpumalanga, is an issue that we're taking very seriously as a trade union. And we understand there are issues. We need to work together as all the stakeholders in making sure that we are fighting for a better life. In Mpumalanga, you find reports, particularly in Witbank and Manashin, that when you open a tap, the water isn't nice. The water is red or brownish, and the health issue for members in Mpumalanga and our communities is a serious issue, not only in Mpumalanga, in the valley here, and also here in Johannesburg. Johannesburg, mining was there in the 1880s, as we had, particularly gold mining, with some uranium in the West Rand, which has had very serious health impacts, including diseases such as leukemia that people are suffering in those communities, in Western area, Canton, Vuyo, those areas. And you would know that Joburg is regarded globally as the most toxic city in the world because of gold and uranium. There's tailings, there's dams, there's wind that comes around and blow all those dirty air and into our houses. And Comrade has spoken about the problems around the respiratory problems that are there. People breathing arsenic and cyanide because of the minings. And as NUMSA, we're in a clear position, which is, you know, that we are supporting renewables. Renewables is the way to go, and it's the only way to go, and it's non-negotiable as far as we're concerned. But we told you that the problem with the form of renewables in the form of IPP, we believe in socialized ownership, communal ownership, cooperatives, municipalization, socialization of energies, so that people can control it. It must be very clear about that. Now, Kumri spoke about the coal problems of Eskom, which is, I must confirm, there was even an attempt to track coal from Medupi. Remember, Medupi and Bosila are not operating in full speed. Not all the units are online. So there's lots of coal that has not been used for many years there, since there's been this time and cost overruns, you know, about for Bosila and Medupi. And municipalities in the corridor route from Bosila to the power stations in Middelburg, where the shortages of coals are expected. Now, the shortage is no longer 20 days, it's less than that now. You can count the number of days since we get that, just about 15 to 10 days. So it's quite a real serious challenge that's facing Eskom around the coal supply. And we don't know how are they going to be mitigating or skating around or avoiding that. The other issue that we need to raise is with the transformation of Eskom. Okay, as we speak today, comrades, you must have heard that Eskom is busy in discussions about the model and strategy and business plan they need to adopt. I think it's called Program 2030, 2035. So we are having a meeting next week, I think on the 3rd, which is Wednesday, where that particular plan is going to be for the first time discussed and consulted with the trade unions. And it's a plan that we're looking at very, very closely. We want to look at it very closely, we want to be very active in that, but we want to make sure that Eskom is not privatized. That Eskom is kept in public hands, not only in the state or government and ANC who are corrupt, but ordinary people, working class and communities must control, must have a say, must drive Eskom. And that we are doing as NUMSA in Eskom, that including the composition of the Eskom board, it has to be restructured, it has to be overhauled, it has to be reconfigured. It must have a representation, majority representation of people who have the interest of our communities at heart, not people who work for profits. We're very clear about that. And I was happy you raised the issue at the beginning for around Section 24 rights in the Constitution. And I think not many people fully understand what is contained in that particular section. I was really very, very impressed when I learned that you did with that question. But that question not only asks for access to an environment that is not harmful, but it talks about sustainable development as well, so that we don't get into these issues of coal. Basically, on the transformation of Eskom, I think one of the challenges we have in Eskom as NUMSA is that we have 3 unions in Eskom, multiple unions, and we not always speak with one voice, which makes things not very, very, very easy for us, but we're trying on a number of occasions and instances to collaborate, like we just did with the West negotiations. I mean, especially NUMSA and NBM, and I don't say NBM here, it would have been nice to have them here as well, because we work together and we very closely. Okay, but as I was indicating, one of the problems there is the right to strike. When you don't have a right to strike, you have very little chances of influencing policy direction of the organization, including government. And you must have seen in June of this month, during the wage negotiations, where there were some strikes, protest actions by workers, where there was load shedding. And you would remember how speedy government responded. From a 0% salary increase for workers in Eskom, the minister was involved, the presidents were involved, meetings were held during weekends and at nights, and the whole situation changed where there was a proper offer that was made. To the extent that the salary increase of this year for Eskom was 7.5 from a 0%. So the trade unions, workers taking it into their own hands, because they understand that Eskom is very arrogant, very intransigent. We have a level of management in Eskom that's not people conscious. That does not prioritize people and communities. And that's one of the inroads that we're making there. We're organizing the managers now. We're extending the rights of the union, including the right to bargain and negotiate, to also negotiate for managers. Just one or few issues, comrade. What is important in terms of what is it, what utility are we looking for? What is the transformed Eskom that we think we need to build as trade unions and in the working class as a whole? Is a utility that supports equity and equitability. And what do we mean by that? For instance, in the situation that we have in the country, ordinary residents, households, the tariff prices that we pay are higher than companies that are paying, including smelters, the mining companies, and engineering firms. So the issue of equitability is very important, affordability. You know, Soweto, there are areas that are not having any electricity, have been switched off many years ago, and because they are not paying. And the ability to pay is very important, that the Eskom has to take into account, not only Eskom and the government. The other issue that's important in a utility is the question of participation and democratic decision making, which we don't have in Eskom. We have fraudsters, we have people who are corrupt, who are working for the Guptas, you know about state capture. I'm not going to repeat all of those things. But we need a different kind of management, a different kind of mentality, and that's the working class mentality. Not the petty bourgeois mentality we see in many of our people who are in higher positions, executives, and top leadership. And secondly, the question of efficiency is important. That Eskom is to be more efficient so that the price, the tariff path is a path that people can afford. So we need to get to a lot of efficiencies, including on the pricing of coal, primary energy and coal. Because the BEs are there, the corrupt deals are there, the Guptas were brought in there, and that's an area that we need to. We have told Eskom that you have two serious cost drivers. That's why the tariff is high, that's why you don't make any profits. Because Eskom made loss for the first time in this year. So the question of efficiency is important. The IPPs are a serious issue, a serious cost driver. That cost that gets thrown to workers, in the high tariffs. The issue of transparency has been raised seriously in this meeting. I can't talk more about that. Eskom is never transparent. It's never transparent. They find lawyers to hide the information. You can ask them when you struggle. Now, when it happens to trade unions who are inside Eskom, who are organized, what do you think would happen to people who are not in Eskom, including ordinary residents and the other issue that's important is the quality of the workplace. The working conditions has to be better than what they are, so that workers will be happy and perform efficiently and productively. So there's some of the areas that we're saying we're raising. The question of sustainability has been talked to in this meeting, and coal is not sustainable. And renewables are the only non-conventional, and the other renewable. And basically what I want to argue as well with Eskom is that Eskom must start to produce and generate renewable energy. There's no reason why not. If we need to reduce coal, definitely there's no if, but we need to replace that, in terms of the electricity supply to our people, as well as sustaining some of the jobs that the workers are able. The other issue that's important for us is the question of solidarity. There's no solidarity or very little solidarity between Eskom workers and ordinary commuters or residents. We find residents having problems, go attack an Eskom site and attack our members. So the question of solidarity is important, the question of consciousness is important, that we are all belonging to the same working class. We can't allow the capitalists to divide us. So I think solidarity is very important. One of the last issues is the issue of public ethos. The value of Ubuntu. Eskom is supposed to be a public company, it's supposed to work for public good, not private interest and fraud and corruption. That would be my last point. Thanks.
Yes. Sorry, let's get a chair there.
So both was first.
You got one?
apologies that I'm late. Yeah, so I mean, I've been asked to give a presentation specifically speaking to the coal-affected communities, but unfortunately that's not my specific area. I think groundwork is more well-based, and I think just to give a point of reference, they did an amazing video on bliss of ignorance. So if people want to actually look at how, particularly in the Naledi area and Witbank, how communities are actually being affected by both the coal mining sector as well as Eskom, that gives you a really good insight into the kinds of struggles. So I come from an organization called Naledi, which is the research arm for COSATU, and over the last year and a half, what we've done is we've run workshops with trade unions across the federations, including NUMSA and PAO, basically trying to conscientize workers why climate change is particularly important. So if we're locating it within the water, electricity, mining nexus, then just to make reference to the specific community, and I'm using the Witbank case as a case in point, but you have an Eskom plant not far away. I think they use about 10,000 kiloliters of water per second, right? Just to do their normal production. But you have a community that's affected by both the air pollution as well as the fact that they're not able to access water, and if they do access water, it's contaminated. Eskom has also been in violation of the air control legislation. So apparently, in terms of the air quality control, there have to be certain standards by which a company, you have to abide by a certain level of greenhouse gas emissions or pollutants that you put in the air. Eskom has been violating this, and despite the fact that CER, the Center for Environmental Rights, as well as other organizations have been trying to, and the community, including Groundwork, has been taking up litigation quite extensively, government does not seem to be responsive. So if you want to put this in a cost-benefit analysis analogy, you look at the health implications of the communities that are there, apart from the fact that it's environmental. You've got children that are either born, they've died before they're born. So there's also examples of abortion. I mean, babies naturally aborting themselves because of the bad health conditions under which they were conceived. Mothers then and children who then survive that then suffer from respiratory diseases, which then lead on to chronic diseases. And as a result of that, your tax base, just in terms of subsidy from a health perspective, obviously this is a poor community, so they use the public health sector. The government's commitment to the public health sector is practically zero. So it's people that are entering the public health sector, having to, for the rest of their life, from the time that they conceive to the time that they grow up, subjected to different forms of medication, stuck to a public health sector that is absolutely useless, and then you've got chronic diseases, with many people eventually dying because hospitals don't either have the right medication or you don't have the right personnel, enough personnel to be able to deal with the issues. So if you just look at the issue of a coal-driven energy sector, there's a whole lot of problems with that particular scenario. And from a labour perspective, and I speak specifically on behalf of COSATU, but also on the basis of the other federations that we've worked with, we've recognized that in the context of climate change and the impact that it has on our water resources, particularly water, that this is actually a foolhardy way to continue. So in terms of our discussions, one of the things that we've been putting forward over the last year and a half, and we've had extensive discussions both in terms of labour and civil society organizations, was in relation to the issue of a just transition. Now, historically, the notion of a just transition is a labour position. It was formed at one of the COP meetings, and the just transition basically speaks to you wanting a transition from a high carbon economy to a low carbon economy, but it has to be fair and it has to be just, and it has to ensure that workers are not going to be the key. They're not going to be the people who actually pay the price on their own, right? So capital as a system has perpetuated a system which even the earth is revolting against, as we can see in terms of climate change. And so when we're moving from a high carbon to a low carbon economy, one has to be clear that you can't say to workers in the coal mining sector, for example, or at Eskom, you know what, actually, because we need to keep our temperature to less than 1 degree, which we're currently failing to do, you actually need to just lose your jobs, because that would be unfair, right? they've actually contributed to the economy. They've ensured that there's sustainability and there's development. But now, because they're located within a sector in which is now a contributor of high carbon, all of a sudden they're the ones that, workers are the ones that have to bear the brunt. So from a labour perspective, what we've been doing quite extensively is engaging with civil society organisations across the board to engage on what should this just transition be like and how do we move towards it. I think the difficulty and perhaps something that Labour should take responsibility for is that our engagement on the issue of the just transition has been rather late, as opposed to being doing it at an earlier time. I think when the just transition notion came out, or when the concept was formed, unfortunately South African Labour was not proactive enough. We had our own challenges, and as a result of that, we've now noting, I think if people look at the, there was the issue of the truck drivers, the coal truck drivers that blockaded Pretoria, right? And that was because there was this whole notion that jobs were going to be lost, and therefore truck drivers took to the streets. And then the second thing was when Eskom made the announcement that it was going to close down, some people say 4, other people say 5, coal-powered power stations, and there were going to be plus minus 40,000 jobs that were going to be lost in terms of indirect jobs, and about 3,000 to 5,000 jobs at the actual plant. So Labour's position initially in relation to that, many people, took us to task and said that you were quite conservative because you started talking about jobs and you forgot about the just transition, and then you told Eskom not to close the power stations. Well, the reality is if we need to move from a non-coal-powered, coal-fired power station or energy source, you can't just decide it's going to happen in 3 years and expect workers to lose their jobs. So there has to be, and that is why we say there has to, from Eskom side as well as from government side, there had to be some commitment, because that's what a just transition also calls for. It calls for a commitment by all parties concerned to come to the table and have a discussion on how we actually move from a high carbon to a low carbon. And it actually also calls for research to be done so that you can actually see, if we talk about a just transition in about 10 years, for example, you'd be able to if you actually go and do an investigation in terms of each coal-powered power station, you'd know exactly how many workers would be leaving naturally, right? As a result of age, they'd be retiring and they'd no longer be there. Then there would be workers who you could possibly offer a early retirement, and then there would be a group of workers who could actually possibly be reskilled to either move into a renewable energy sector. So those are the kinds of forward-thinking engagements that's required, as opposed to just simply saying, well, you know what, we're just going to close 5 coal-powered power stations and that will be it. We also have to be very cognizant of the fact that we sit with, and I think in terms of Stats SA, they talk about a 40% unemployment rate, and that's using the broad definition. I'm of the view that it's larger than that. So if you're talking about high levels of unemployment and less than 1% growth rate, how do you perpetuate a system that's going to increase the number of people that are unemployed? Because then, on one level you're moving towards a so-called low-carbon economy, but at the same time you're increasing the social expenditure that one needs to pay because more people are going to be on the grounds, and there's going to be social upheaval, and people not having food, etc. So there is a massive ramification. I think just on the issue of water and its issue in terms of historically, we know that the apartheid state subsidized the monopoly capital, particularly in the coal sector, quite substantially, both in terms of electricity and water. I think the issues on climate change, or what we're experiencing in terms of climate change, both in terms of the erratic rainfalls that we see in various parts of our country, is a reality. It's not something that I think that you can just have a quick fix. But I do want to challenge some notions around scarcity, or for example that the current form of water supply is not conducive to the number of people. I think in the concept note it made reference to, for example, the 60% of freshwater resources available, and therefore the freshwater resources outnumber the number of people. I think one has to be quite clear around the infrastructure, right? So we are not a freshwater abundant continent, right? I think Ghana is actually one of the largest freshwater resource country. But generally African countries, or countries on the continent, are not blessed with an abundance of fresh water. However, the infrastructure in most of our countries are colonialist. They come with, it has a particular notion brought to us by colonialists who brought, for example, if you open up a tap, there's a particular standard for the water pressure. Now, whether that standard of the water pressure is conducive to our use, nobody questioned. Well, or maybe some engineers, but they're not the dominant. Then there's also the issue of how we actually use our water resource. I saw the presentation, Howland's got something on reclamation, right? But there's reclamation and desalination, there's rainwater harvesting, there's replenishing of aquifers. Brian and I have been in the struggle for years trying to contest with the Department of Water Affairs and others to try and really look at alternative ways to actually do water demand in a way that's actually conducive. If you look at the city of Johannesburg and if you walk around practically every suburb, you'll find tons of water leaks. When you look at the statistics from both in terms of South Africa as well as the International Water Association, I think our water loss is still close to 40 to 50%, and that's because of poor infrastructure. So in many instances, the issues that we face, and Cape Town is the case in point, it's not so much about a scarcity of water as it is about a mismanagement. And I think if we're going to be talking about water, particularly in the context of climate change, and if we're going to be talking about a water charter, I think we need to be very clear about the principles that inform it. Privatization and commodification of water is still very much at play. I think the fact that the public sector, particularly public utilities, are going to be turned into self-operated enterprises. They're going to be broken up into little corporate enterprises, which is going to be pushing the costs of the services higher. And the fact that there isn't a direct commitment by government to actually support the renewable energy sector, which could potentially, not just in terms of creating new job opportunities, but actually become a new manufacturing sector for South Africa and allow for a proper just transition. And I'm just using that as a particular example. It has the potential, but despite the fact that we engage in quite extensively, we don't see traction. There's IPPs, and it's in the form of privatization, which we as Labour contest quite vociferously. But even the possibility of actually locating renewable energy at a cooperative level and allowing ownership and the potential of what that holds to be realized is something that's not on the table.
Thank you. Okay, so great inputs, all connected. We can't leave workers behind in coal. We can't leave mining affected communities behind in the just transition. There clearly are ways forward. NUMSA has some ideas, Benchmarks has ideas, Project 90 has ideas, Naledi has ideas. So let's open it up. Engagements. This is exciting. Questions, comments, additions?
Around the engagement with Eskom, and we talked about needing a different kind of leadership. Do you think there might be any prospect of Labour representation on the board on the table? Any receptivity to decorporatization? I mean, that was one of the key demands we were talking about, and haven't heard much of it lately. And the Public Investment Corporation bill, which also, now I don't know what the merits of this total bill are. I came from the DA, so I tend to be a bit skeptical of it. But then I read, oh, but it says there must be Labour representation on the board. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe then it has something going. Have you got any views on that bill? Do you see any hope of getting the Public Investment Corporation more responsive to the workers whose pensions they're investing?
Good questions. Daveen, and then I'll come in. Yeah?
The point of the union, in the presentation of the common convention, that is there are 3 unions. Even we are sitting with a big problem about unions because we are part of Makua and we fight the bad practices of mining companies by violating the environment. But we as community activists and the unions never talk about what would happen if mining company closed. Because the concern of the workers is why the community is fighting, because we have a decent job and they don't care about the health implication, like the sand mining in the West Coast. The radiation are so high, people don't care about if they are affected by the radiation because no one tells them the danger of radiation. And even for us in the community, but no one, there's no engagement because unions feel that they get the subs from the workers, so they benefit. So they are not doing so much for the community. Even if we're going to fight and say close down the mine, what will happen to the workers? So they, most of the time, they will protect the interests of workers, not interests of the community. Like for instance, what happened in 2016, where the salaries of the workers was decreased, and they joined NUM and they went on a strike. There were more than 20 people suspended. The mine taking only a few of them. But I think it was a game that was people play by saying, no, I'm innocent, give me my job back. But I will say what my former Ayanda did say. So Ayanda was kept out and I received my job back. But the union took the case to the court, but never put so much pressure. Because in witnesses every cases, but when it comes to the mine took them to the labor court and the mine win the cases, but we know there's a lot of briberies in this game. Even when the unions getting briberies from mining companies, like keeping quiet and not putting so much pressure so the workers can go back and be more stronger inside the company. So how are we going to deal with this issue?
Thank you, Davine. Dan?
Yeah, thanks for allowing me the chance to ask questions. Desmond Desal from the Environmental Alliance in Durban. I just want to ask this, because there's a notion that you presented, that Eskom will have, and Eskom has stated in the media, they're going to have load shedding because they don't have coal. But if you go to Richards Bay and you go to Durban, millions of tons of coal have been shipped out. But as a country, coal belongs to the people of this country. And yet that coal has been shipped out to India, to China, to Europe, other parts of Europe. And yet we had this threat of load shedding. That been this fake news that we've been fed all the time of load shedding that's deliberately created. It's an answer on that. Secondly, the second question I have is around, we're saying, well, you know, Eskom has been talking about closing outdated, old-fired, coal-fired power stations, the old technology, right? And at the same time, there are EIAs on the table. They're really starting to develop new coal-fired power station in KZN, which is going to be privatized. Independent power plant. What are we saying as the union? What are we saying as civil society with regard to those independent power stations that have been developed? And there could be more coming up if the Chinese come in. Because we're going to be the gateway for Africa to provide more energy at cheap rates to the rest of the Chinese, while we in the country are going to pay for it all, right? All these loans that have been taken. What are we saying about the Transnet loan, or the Eskom loan recently taken? The Eskom loan that was taken, 5 billion rand from the China Development Bank to Eskom. Given that Brian Molefe and them were involved in this here, and they got Brian Damas, they got billions of rands, 30 billion. What are we saying about that loan? Some of that loan is for Kusili, 200 billion, which is riddled with corruption. And there's also coming another 180 million, 2.7 billion rand from the New Development Bank. What are we saying about that? The third question in regard to the new coal-fired power station, which will be independently, which is going to be privatized, right? What is the union saying about that, given there's this notion from government to privatize a lot of the state parastatals, Transnet, SABC, our airlines, Eskom probably could be. What are you saying about that in regard to that? Also bearing in mind that new technology comes with less workers, less labor, automotive. You press the button, one person operates. Similar to the new ships. 17 people with these mega ships that are carrying about 20 times the amount of containers. Only 17 people operate them. What are you saying about that with the automotive? The final question I have then for you as well. What about mining in sensitive areas where we have World Heritage Site? tourism has created millions of jobs in this country. And now we're going to go and mine there because of our thirst to supply, because of the agreements that were cut behind closed doors with the Chinese and all of them, to supply China and other countries with coal. So we're going into our sensitive areas. Is that not been also the program with the rhinos and all being killed all these years, deliberately allowed to be killed off so that we can mine there, and people are not benefiting. In KZN, the last couple of months we've had 3 comrades killed because of mining. What are you saying about that? Assassinations that are taking place. And the 4th issue, people are losing. On the one hand, Ramaphosa is talking about expropriation land without cost, expropriating the land without cost. Please tell us, explain to us, what do they mean? Does it mean that the expropriation for mining, expropriation for big corporations, or what does it mean, the land? Because are they misleading us once again, lying to us, and we are going to be the victims once again as communities?
Thank you. There were lots of questions. Let's give it to the panel, and then we'll come back for another round. We've got at least 40 minutes. Okay. So who wants to go? Yeah, go. Whoever you're comfortable. You need the mic?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's easy for us. You can get it out.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So, I think the Davin raised an issue that I flagged rather slightly. I think the big problem, comrades, is that it's fine to state the big problems, but I think Labour has left behind its leadership role of the whole society. I'm going to compare the 80s. Some of the unintended consequences, for example, when Labour, the NUM in particular, developed the Mine Health and Safety Council, it excludes impacts on mining communities. Right? The NPRDA, where there are rights afforded to employers and the other rights are recognized for workers, workers' voices are excluded from it. Effectively, mining communities are disenfranchised and have remained disenfranchised. So I think what's happened is that organized labor has been a bit of an extended honeymoon, because quite clearly you guys would get the social and labor plans and you won't even share it. You are entitled to get it. Mining communities don't get that. So comrades, there must be a deeper conversation. So if this movement that we will tackle these issues actually opens up that space to find new alignments, there are objective problems. There are accountability problems. There are real problems that affect. I've been a unionist, I worked for, you name the union, I probably worked there. So it's not an issue about being anti-union. But I do think that the unions do not think broadly about sometimes their inheritors of the poison chalice. You know, that it will be great if unions can join in and say, sorry, here there must be no mining. But unions think of members. I know we have this issue with Glenn Bufani and a whole lot of other people like that. So you know, things are not easy. So that's the one part of it, and I think that my sister there raised that one issue. I just think regarding coal, comrades, earlier I flaunted the idea about 8 NGOs, we are one of them. It's a coal mine that the Indian company is trying to open up. And we opposed it, and it's there where they organize people to come and protest against us for jobs. Now, there must be an agreement that we don't have to take the line, as some NGOs are doing, some trade groups are doing, that all mining is bad. We've done research on mining. We have yet to be convinced that mining is good. But let's assume that there are places where mining can take place, where it doesn't damage the environment, doesn't jeopardize water supplies, etc. You know, but I think what happens that doesn't often happen is that the unions are silent in their discourse. Just another issue regarding coal. In 1960, 437 workers died in the Colesbrook mining disaster outside Vuyo. White mine workers got a pension from there. There were 6, and the majority were black workers. Black workers got a once-off payment. There are these kind of things, comrade, that I think within the sector of the mines, where you can recuperate some of those struggles and begin to recapture the imagination of all society.
don't know if it's going to reach, but
Can you hear me, comrades?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Substitute voice. Let's start with the first question, Richard. On the Eskom board, I think all of the issues that we're raising, we're not going to get them without a fight, a serious fight. So we must be prepared to take up that fight. But not only as trade unions, but all of us, working class formations. And in 2016, we put up that demand in Eskom as NUMSA. We're still working around that issue. The point is, the question to ask is there a necessity for civil society and the working class to be part of these boards, of these utilities that are run by public money and supposed to be for public interest? So that's the debate, including the one that you're raising around the PIC bill, and that's the question. We have to mobilize, we have to engage, we have to fight for it, we have to struggle for it. It's not going to happen. But first, we need to make each and every one of us conscious of that necessity. Because these boards are regarded as the exclusive reserve of the bourgeoisie and the capitalists and the elites and the crooks like Brian Mulefe and Matsela Kopp and others. So we must convince ourselves that we need to be there and we must fight for it. If you look into the whole legislation in South Africa, from the Constitution and everywhere else, they talk about democracy, transparency, working class control, or working class participation, decision making, all those issues. But I mean, in practice, we don't find them. And I agree with my colleague, Hassen, is that the unions can be more organized in all these areas, because there's no issue that should be outside the agenda and the parameters of the trade union. There's no issue. Whether a mine is opening, whether, dark issues happening there, those affect workers. In the 80s, you remember, you remember that community struggles, community unions, UDF unions, in the 80s, were working with workers on community issues like rent boycotts and stuff like that. So we need to go back there. We're forgetting our own struggles, our own gains, our own victories, so we need to go back there, back to basics. That's what we haven't done. And you raise the issue of corporatization. And that's the issue, that's why we want Eskom transformed. Away serving the interests of corporate and elites, to serve the interests of the common, ordinary workers on the ground and residents in our townships, in our communities. That's what we want. We don't want Eskom for profits. We want Eskom for service of supplying electricity to each and everybody, including universal access, of electricity. So we're very clear about that. Democratize, decommodify, decommercialize, or decorporatize, and decarbonize. We're very clear about that as NUMSA. And that's the road that we need to go. We need to be working to. The issue of Saldanha, I'm not aware of that issue, but I mean, you know what happened. What happened? Not only in Saldanha, in many areas, many communities, many developments, trade unions, and ordinary residents. There are always tensions between the two. But the key is how to work around that, how to pay each other, so that we don't fall into that agenda, where we continue to work in solidarity, in unity, as organized workers, whether employed and not employed. You raised the issue of the IPPs, the coal IPPs. Very clear, NUMSA is opposed to any IPPs, coal or renewable or any other IPPs. We don't want. That's privatization, finish and club, or PPPs. We don't want that. Now, secondly, the issue about additional coal production and generation in terms of electricity, we can't support that as NUMSA. It's against our own resolution, our own policy position. We are for renewable in the future, and they are non-negotiable. Just we must manage the just energy transition, so that it doesn't affect the working class negatively, as comment has indicated before. On the loans, on all these other loans, they are a problem. There's no transparency. Those that are in Eskom, like the recently announced one, Richard, here did the ITC meeting, we were in there the other week. We need to get more transparency, more disclosure. and work and negotiate on the terms. Because those loans must be repaid by our monies as ordinary workers, whether it's government guarantees or it's high electricity tariff prices. So we need to work around those areas. That's what we're going to be engaging with Eskom, even the meeting on Wednesday. Transparency on all areas, on everything else. If I leave anything out, privatization, I'm getting competitors, I mean, we'll fight that. We have a policy position of anti-privatization, of nationalization and socialization. And we say, for instance, we should be saying that these IPPs, the renewable ones, must be appropriated. You're asking a question about expropriation. We are for expropriation. Because these renewable IPPs are taking money from the public purse, are taking money from ordinary residents. And the sun and the wind is ours. It's not theirs. So what we need to do also is beneficiation is important. That the technologies for renewables must be manufactured in the country. If it must be in Mpumalanga, in the power stations, it preserves some of the jobs, then that beneficiation in those technologies and skills transfer must happen on an urgent basis. I'm just going to pause there.
There's a few questions I asked you. One was the issue of mining.
What the questions are for me?
No, mining of coal. And Eskom is saying that they don't have any coal, they don't have the load shedding, and yet they're exporting, the coal has been exported out of Richards Bay and Durban for China, India, and all those countries. Those millions of tons of coal, what are you saying about that? Because that is also a sense of driving the community, the country, taking our coal and exporting. And the second question I asked about the whole notion of mining in sensitive areas and destroying tourism jobs, where we have millions of jobs on the coast. And we know already the mining companies are putting off workers all over the country, right? And at the same time, they want to go mine in sensitive areas and creating the crisis of mining, when there is enough sufficient coal for this country, but making more profit by exporting.
Hameeda wants to pick up on some of those issues. Yeah, come. Yeah, what do you need?
Okay, so I firstly am very well known for embarrassing the hosts.
Yes.
You should not have a single bottle of water on your table.
Agreed.
So you are
It
truly,
came up earlier.
yeah, so I'm sorry, but thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is a water activist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not a part
This is
to blame.
absolutely simple, and in fact, if it was brought up, you should have removed it before I got here. Because Brian should have told you I embarrassed ministers. I mean, the thing is, if we've got to put our money where our mouth is. And South Africa's water, I mean, generally, is supposed to be SANS 241 compliant. And the reason why I'm reiterating the point is precisely this. That if we don't look at the small things, right, then we miss the bigger picture and we become party to the very things that we're trying to contest. So please, in future, don't have bottled water on your table and promote ordinary tap water, because at the moment there's nothing wrong with it. So that's the first one. The second one, I think, in terms of communities and civil society organizations, let's be frank. COSATU is in an alliance with the ANC. So the ANC,
That's why we left.
and thank you for leaving, because it's now given COSATU impetus to get his house in order. But the point is, when you look at our history, and the history of struggle, and you look at the labor movement's history in bringing forward a democracy, there was a sense of independence, right? There was a sense of militancy, there was agency, and there was a direct relationship between the unions and workers, and there was a connection because workers knew they came from the communities, and there was an affinity because we were united working class. So apart from the fact that we're in an alliance, we also have business unionism. We all of the trade unions across the federations are guilty of. So when you move away from your workers as your base, your workers' subscriptions as being your sense of who you are and sense of identity, and you move towards making money with those worker subscriptions in the billions or in the trillions, and you don't account for it, and then we then fight over it, and then shoot each other and break up and all of that, then capital will do what they do when we're at our most vulnerable, right? So I think introspection has been happening. So it's not in every space that we're able to articulate, But I think the current space, and the reason why I say, I'm glad that NUMSA left, is because initially, COSATU wasn't able to acknowledge or review its problematic relationship with the ANC. But with the threat of public sector becoming private sector and massive job losses, the fact that Cyril Ramaphosa does not serve the interest of the working class nor the interest of workers is abundantly clear. And the fact that SAFTU is out there has forced COSATU to look really long and hard. They are a public sector union by and large. Right? So it's difficult. And I think those are realities that we face, but we continue to engage. But at least there's I think at the last special CEC, COSATU came out and actually for the first time threatened the ANC, saying, well, you continue to share jobs or threaten to share jobs, and you won't see us at the polls in 2019. Now, whether they're going to do it or not, obviously proof of the pudding is in the eating, but that's the first time in a hell of a long time that COSATU has actually come out speaking strongly. We had our Congress and the same sentiment was expressed both to Ramaphosa and to Verimantash in no uncertain terms. So again, we will have to see what happens. And I think to come to your point about the coal, I think this is his trade-off. On one hand, you have Eskom being cut up, then you have threatening of closing coal-powered power stations, and what do workers need? Jobs. So you go and you sign deals with China, but you don't do renewable energy, which you can do. Right? You don't do a transfer of ownership and beneficiation, but you do a new coal-powered power station. Right? It also serves a particular monopoly, and we have to be clear who's part of that party. So I think Hassan's point around let's do real deep introspection and look to where the ownership is and who stands to benefit. I think, yeah, some of the unions are guilty as charged. So I think but we're in a really, really hard space. But at the same time, I want to put the challenge to civil society organizations. Historically, when workers went on strike, so I can remember when OKs existed and OKs went on strike, not a single community person voted from OK. So let me ask you, when a worker goes on strike, how many of you, as a community representative, support those workers? So I think it works both ways. Right? So if the way in which capital wins is if we do not have a united front. It doesn't help to say to the trade unions, and I'm not saying that because I'm being defensive, but it doesn't help to just point to us as the unions and say, well, you're not doing your job and you're not connecting with us. In the same way, we're being alienated from the very communities from which we come. When there's a bus driver strike and people can't go to work, they say these bloody workers are going on strike again, right? They're pissed off. They want, they demand, they're lazy. I'm not saying that you don't get workers that are lazy. But the point is we need to really go back to the basics, not just in terms of unionism, but I think in terms of activism. So the experience that the comrade raised from the community in South, I can understand. But the difficulty is if we do not have community structures or local structures that involve communities and labor as a platform of civil society organizations. If you speak to trade unions and you say, well, are you a civil society organization? They'll say no, but they are. So when you have civics, trade unions are supposed to be at the forefront. And in the current onslaught of capital, the only organized force at the moment that has the potential to shift is labor. But we need to get our act together. We need to take the leadership role. But I think we cannot do it without the support of the communities. I think, for example, on the issue of the loans, I think that would have been a perfect example if we had gotten our act together. So you've got BRICS from below, you've got BRICS from above, you've got BRICS CSOs, you've got BRICS academic, and then you've got BRICS labor. So how are we going to get our shit together? If we have these different silos, but we're all fighting BRICS, or we're all engaging on the issue of BRICS. But if we had a consolidated position and we had a clear message to government, then the loans would not have happened. I mean, the NDB is worse than the IMF. So just for those of you who don't know, when you borrow money from the NDB, which happens to be part of our bank, because all of the BRICS countries give an X amount towards the bank, but your repayment on the loan is worse than the conditions of the IMF. So yeah, you're right. It's taxpayers that are going to be paying. Have you seen taxpayers march? Have you seen protest? Ramaphosa came back from China. Howdy how. Nobody gave him a boo of a welcome. Right? We just complacently having this discussion. right? So I think we need to, I mean, apart from, maybe I'm unfortunately not going to be here tomorrow, but I think in terms of the charter and in terms of the way forward, I think consolidated, structured unity against very specific targeted areas where we, unions, civil society organizations, community-based organizations, and I think that's how you're going to win the issues of the heritage sites, unless we see the value. And you must remember that the difficulty about apartheid is some people will see the heritage site as being an environmental issue when people have bread and butter issues. So one has to be able to locate it in a context that people can resonate with, right? I hope I've answered all of you.
Can I just ask, because you're not going to be here tomorrow, can I take advantage of you while you're on the podium to ask you a last question, Mr.
Short one, because I want to open it up.
Sure. The integrated energy plan, and the one I sent, some of you put it up early on, didn't talk about the oil and gas and the entire coastline sold off to some of the major oil corporations, including those involved in huge scandals in their own countries and the continent, right?
Bikitsha, got it.
Yeah. So I'm trying to find out, and my question to you would be that, you know, in the past, COSATU had the parliamentary officers, and at NEDLAC we were meeting together with civil society. We could converge. For example, we converge on the National Key Point Act, the apartheid legislation. We fought it off with COSATU. I'm just wondering who is handling that part of it, and how we can converge. Because I think it's critical that the unions and civil society meet there as well.
So just the short answer to that is there is a representative for community. Do you know who he is? Well, then I suggest you find out.
Okay. So Brian, and now we do the second and last round. So Brian, comrade at the back, comrade there, Devine, Imran, right? That's it. And yourself, yes, from Karoo. Okay, Brian.
Yeah,
Karoo and
it's a bit of a comment and a challenge. This is around, people talked about reskilling and skills development. I'm going to take up on what Hameeda and other comrades have said today about water leaks. We had a water leak outside our place a couple of weeks ago. It took 8 plumbers, independent guys, and municipal employees to come and fix that water leak. It took me 2 emails to the head of water to get 5 vehicles out the next day, twice. When I was talking to the guys fixing the leak, the foreman who fixed the one leak in the end had served a 5-year apprenticeship. The guy that had been sent twice to fix the leak had done a 2-year learnership. And this is where I'm going to come to the next challenge, is the e-water seater and our skills development for reskilling. I used to get invited to those meetings, but maybe I made too much noise then, they stopped inviting me. The one meeting I went to, they spoke about the nuclear training, and they had put the bulk of their money into training the future engineers. When I mentioned where's the renewable energy training, zip, 0. And I think we need to reverse this and ask these questions of that e-water seat again. What are we doing? Are we reintroducing apprenticeships? Because these learnerships are not working. We're not getting the skilled workers that we need. Are we seeing the right skills set being developed for renewable energy? Because I don't think it's happening. Because we've seen that with the water, solar geysers leaking, badly installed. So the training wasn't there. And it all fits into this e-water seat, and I think we need to really pay attention to that in our charter.
Thank you. Our comrade okay, I'll come to you at the back. Comrade from anti-fracking Karoo, you want to kick in, and then we'll go to the comrade at the back there.
Okay, yes, I just want to add to the conversation by telling you a little bit of what's happening in the Karoo. I've been listening to all the inputs today, and then I realized that our situation in the Karoo is kind of different to the rest of the communities that are represented here, because it's been said more than once that the problem isn't water, but rather a water management issue. So in the Karoo, the problem actually is water. we don't have water, or we've got very little water. We are almost totally reliant on underground water. And then obviously in that we don't have water, there's also injustice when it comes to the very little water resources that are available. We are a land organization primarily working with farm workers and small-scale farmers and producers. So regarding the farm worker, you'll see that the farm owner will have his own monopoly over the very little water that's available, while we are dealing with cases of farm workers and dwellers actually having to drink water from dams with animals, where you could clearly see the green, I don't know what you call that furry stuff that's on the water, but you see that, and it's definitely not safe. We've referred that to the Human Rights Commission. It's under investigation. In the Fish River area, for example, there's this great Fish River running through. There's a water scheme where people have to have licenses to be able to use the water that runs through communities. So the river runs there, but you're not actually allowed to use it because it's now privatized or commodified or whatever you call that. So now also with the emerging farmers, your communities, your land reform farms, there's very poorly kept infrastructure or no water infrastructure at all on those farms. And that's the farms that are now allocated to your upcoming small-scale farmers and producers. So now the situation is bad as it is, and then we have to deal with fracking and uranium mining. So as I've said, we're totally reliant on the underground water, so we cannot take any risk of industry coming in and polluting the water table underneath. We have managed to fight off Shell. We teamed up with various civil society organizations and even with organized agriculture, only because we had to, but we successfully fought them off. And then that was actually just a red herring, because then whilst we were busy with that, we noticed that they already started exploring for uranium also in the Karoo. So then we shifted the focus to uranium, and amidst that fight, they announced that fracking is coming back. I've heard you saying that they will probably not do fracking in the Karoo. I totally agree that supposedly there aren't any gas there. We definitely don't have the water that's needed. There's no infrastructure, and also the geology of the Karoo, it's not feasible to do it there. But must I wrap up?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, so basically we will be going into a ban fracking campaign, because we've seen government do ridiculous things before, so we're not taking any chances on that. But I also had a question, please. I would like to know, we're working on this renewable energy plan, but now obviously that will need to be funded. And Eskom kind of we can hold accountable, because it's like government, and government is supposed to be accountable and all that. But what if the private industry now funds the renewable energy? Then we'll end up being slaves of the Ruperts, and how do we deal with that?
Good question. Come in behind you. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Comrade. I'm a little bit provoked by the panelists there. And it's quite clear that Eskom is not going to move away from the use of coal in order to produce energy. And I'm trying to look at whether the labor movement considered the possibility of a worker takeover of Eskom in order to make sure that we shift the balance of forces. Have we thought about that? The second part is that in order to mobilize and to bring a different mindset in our communities, for instance, in the Eastern Cape, there's already a discussion going on of setting up community schools. At the moment we call it community schools because we want to bring in an alternative curriculum which is based in terms of supporting the decolonization of education. So I'm looking at the fact that for instance, that from the labor movement there's a lot of resources and money there. Will they be able to support such initiatives so that we go back to the 80s as the comment said, that alliance and solidarity between communities and the labor movement.
Excellent.
Thanks so much. Mine is just to appreciate the presentations, the in-depth presentations delivered by our panelists since the morning up to now. I just want to check something, because I am coming from a grassroots organization where awareness raising and other critical activities raised by the presentations here need to be conducted on the ground. And lack of finances, lack of funding in order to be able to run, this kind of awareness raising, politicization, and so on and so forth that needs to be done. I just want to check with us inside in the house here, where do we stand with regard to the resources? Because these things that we say here, we need this in order to be able to be implemented.
That's a good point. I'll just say this, and others can respond, because I think it's an important point. Comrades, what we learned in our activism and learning even from the 80s was that we must use what we have and make it happen. And so right now, for us to build our food sovereignty center here at WITS, we're doing a public proposal for crowdfunding. And we're inviting the public to contribute to help us build a food sovereignty center here. There's no money. The university said, okay, you demanded the building, you got the building, make it work. So we're trying everything. We're even going to try having a community sale here at the university and invite people to come buy cakes and everything like that. We must get down to some very basic things to mobilize resources. But before you leave here though, we're going to give you a whole lot of resources. You're going to get an animation, which is in isiXhosa and in English tomorrow on the water crisis. Make those resources work for you, including whatever anyone else has amongst us. Take it down to the ground, make it work. Okay. Last point, Devin and Imran.
I read a very interesting article in this, the Mining Weekly, about the investors need to prove up Zimbabwe mining pudding. They want to invest $300 million into the coal industry. And even I read here that the coking coal that is in Zimbabwe, they use it for making coke. So we really need to have a consumer boycott. And even Mozambique said that they, in their planning, they're going to build a coal railway. So it's interesting to read about what happened in our neighboring countries. And we've got the Bikitsha organization. But in Zimbabwe, then people don't speak about the mining industry. They just speak about building agroecology schools. But when it comes to fighting the government for bad system, the people keep quiet. So we really need to put pressure on our comrades in the different countries.
Thank you, David.
I'm coming from a totally different perspective as usual. Looking at it from a consumer rights perspective. When we look at coal and energy, the proposed increase with NUMSA is 30% for electricity. And then we look at the fuel price increase next week of over R1 extra on a litre or R1.30 on diesel. And then we look at Sasol, that is coal generated fuel, that is subsidized by this big coal infrastructure, that is making massive private profits off coal mining, that is not being plowed back to subsidize fuel. So we're looking for a point of convergence in terms of communities, ordinary citizens, the unions, and the climate justice movement. And I think the the climate, to use the same pun, is right now where we can actually mobilize around high price of energy, fuel and electricity, and water. So the convergence comes there where we actually use that as the catalyst to mobilize on the ground, in terms of saying that here is the result of bad policy, bad management, and privatization. And this is where we are right now as citizens, paying through tax and paying through high fuel prices and paying for those massive loans. It's not coming for free. So the cost of the infrastructure loans that Cyril's going around begging throughout the world is my grandchildren's going to pay for that, not even us. And we need to make the public aware of that we are paying for that. It's not coming for free. And the strings attached is back to slavery. We've been sold into slavery as consumers, as communities, as workers, in perpetuity, unless we stop this right now. And that I think is where we can have the biggest impact if we look at organizations like PAPI, if we look at other organizations that's working on the ground right now with regards to the high fuel prices, but also energy prices at the same time. And if we can get that back to the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee kind of vibe on the ground, then we have a fighting chance.
I'm wrapping this up, and I'm going to hand over to our panelists. I just have one question myself for Vuyo. So Vuyo, I mean, I think you must have heard since this morning, there's definitely an echo in the room around building solidarities, coming together, uniting, etc. We can't be in our silos. And Hameeda also, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, if we have a common platform, if we have our mass power, it's harder for the state and the dominant force to divide us, play us off each other, co-opt us, get us to do soft legitimation and so on. So we really got to come together. So Vuyo, my question is, what happened to the NUMSA United Front? Okay, who wants to respond to any of the issues? Yes, Chief.
Comrades, just because I'm soft-spoken by nature, so I'll use the mic. Every time the comrades at the panel here get closer to me, I want to move them further away so we can have the real discussion afterwards. Comrades, the experience, and I feel the pain because I spent a lot of my life in the union, so let's understand that. I don't think the example of unions on managing their own pension funds, the investment funds, everything bodes well for workers being on board. So the discussion must include that. I mean, every comrade I worked with there was either accused of stealing, and I'm shocked when I read it. So clearly, these investment funds, I don't understand. But anyway, so I just want to flag that one issue there. I also won't be here tomorrow, so I want to raise, this is a very important discussion, so maybe how the form, because I think maybe more than putting out a declaration of principles, if we can find this as a space to get the ideas and the people together to build a movement, I think I'll be pleased if we do the spiritual connection, how to talk about common struggles and how to tackle that. I'll be pleased, to be more connected with that. Let me just make this final point, is that what's happening in the mining sector has to happen. The last time the mining regime was so powerful, I guess, was when Cecil John Rhodes and him were there. Because Gwede was a mining secretary. Cyril was a secretary of the NUM. I know this comrade, we so organized in different sectors. I was in NUMSA. We have never had this level of concentrated thinking around mining. And they somehow believe that this idea of the sunrise economy, not a sunset one, the new dawn, this is the ideology that these guys are pushing along. And they are ruthless. I've actually been talking on the radio on the mining charter, and the media's been calling me on New Year. They simply ignore what you say. This is the old style. Now, I don't know whether they inherited it from the Communist Party or just from neoliberal capitalism, but they just ask you to say something and ignore it. And they make sure, as they did in Tolobeni, that there's very little time for poor people to talk. So clearly, we have the worst of it when communists become capitalists. You've got shit on both sides. Because they learned how to do the things so perfectly well, And this is the problem we're dealing with. This ideology is so strong, and that during November 12th to the 15th, there's a World Social Forum convened summit here on mining and extractivism happening in Joburg. Some of the lead agents are women. We participated in the steering committee, but AIDC are leading. So keep your minds open, because Brazilians and others will be coming here during that time. So my own point is that I think we're dealing with a difficulty, but one part of the difficulty which may divide some of us is that we're happy to see the back of Zuma, and we wish Cyril well. I don't know why, but we wish him well, right? Simply because that one was so bad. The common sense, when the logic tells you that this guy must do better than that other guy, and I'm really beginning to wonder, right? Because all this mining, these jobs, they're mining anything that moves in the ocean's economy, mining sand, salt. So on one hand, mining is in decline, the traditional mining, but the others, they're just giving licenses like hell, right? And this is aimed at the elections, right? This is here to make sure that the bosses will be happy with this, and then you get the GDP figures to be good. All macroeconomic indicators are there. And then Cyril looks like he's turned things around, 100 billion in the bank, investments, etc. And formal jobs will be there for some people maybe. This is the kind of vision that they want for next year for the elections. So we're fighting their juggernaut. This new dawn, sunrise economy, the mining sector is so powerful. I heard you speak at this Mandela mining precinct, talking about how the GDP was so powerful. Now it's about 6 or 7. It was 20 or something. I mean, he wants to continue doing what the colonialists and apartheid regime did. This is exactly what Wade is talking about. Anyhow, so we are dealing with that. All the other niceties we're talking about here. Anyway.
This is the final statements from me. I really just want to hone in on the education awareness. In my experience, working with several communities over the years, is that our greatest enemy is ignorance. It's ignorance. People get treated so unjustly, largely because of the inequalities, like lack of financing, but also largely because they just don't know. And there are people that do know. For example, the people that are in this room, some of us are from the CBO, some of us are from NGOs. So we're the ones who have information, and therefore, one thing about information is that once you have it, you ask the question, what should you do about it? And so, in that respect, when we talk about education awareness, we need to begin to teach people again about democracy. People don't feel as if this democracy thing works. Capitalism, we obviously all agree, does not work. It hasn't worked. So, before we can say that let's change every single complete thing, let's begin to teach people about democracy and let's make it work. And then if we find that it absolutely does not work, then we completely scrap that system as well. I don't know what's going to happen on others like that. But anyway, the other thing is then again, I'm just going to speak from my experiences only. Again, when it comes to education and awareness, when we're talking with people in communities, I can count on one hand the number of times I've heard the words climate change said to me. I can count on one hand. I've been doing this for a few years. And literally on one hand is the amount of times that people have come to me and said the words climate change. They can identify, people can identify that things are happening, there are changes that are taking place. But to say that it is climate change, to attribute it to climate change is something that people aren't used to doing. So again, platforms such as media, local media, specifically in vernacular languages, is something else I also want to inculcate. Our ability to be able to begin to start speaking about these things in vernacular languages also will gain a great deal of traction, because now people begin to understand the concept of climate change. I used to be able to pick my fruits at this time of the year, now I'm picking it at a later time of the year. It's not really that perplexing of a thing in some examples, but it is climate change. And then lastly, again, as it relates to water, for me, it's building the capacity then again for people to be able to effectively engage with local authorities, whether at the national level, provincial level, at the governmental level, at the corporate level, or even with unions. It's the ability to be able to sit down. I mean, we South Africans can do the negotiation thing so well. We've proved it time and time again. But we need to be able to build that capacity again for people to, in their quarters, to begin to have dialogues and debate about the very, very difficult conversations. Because we are in a difficult time. And we might not be comfortable with it, but we need to begin to start having some of these very difficult conversations, i.e. the landlord. But where it starts for me at least is education and awareness. Continue to educate, continue to inform people, raise their consciousness levels.
Thank you.
Let's start with Brian. We had a number of questions on renewables, water leaks, and the SITA and those issues. Let's start by saying that I am involved in the EWC board, so we can discuss some of the issues outside. And I mean, my contacts are available for everyone. Sure. So the first issue. I know that there were challenges around the water leaks project that the SITA took up with the Department of Water and Sanitation. Because of the mess and the crisis in that department and finances, there were challenges. But it seems things now are getting better. We can discuss those issues. You raised the issue of apprenticeships. First, the country still trains artisans in many trades. So apprenticeship is there. It's just called the leadership. It's a 3-year program. Minimum 3 years, and I think it's a 4-year program. So it's still there. SITA runs that, Eskom runs that. I mean, many companies are doing that. So that the artisanship is still there, including technicians and stuff like that. But if there are any other challenges, we can discuss. You asked about training in renewables. We have training providers in the SITA that are accredited to train workers and learners and learnerships on renewables. One of them working with is NUMSA. We were in the Northern Cape a few weeks ago with workers and shop stewards from the IPPs. Even if we reject and oppose the IPPs, but we don't reject workers. And we are going to go there again before the end of October on the program, what skills that they need to be trained in renewables. So there is something on the renewables that I will speak to. There was an issue that was raised about the United Front, which that one, I know you like that one. The issue of the United Front, the United Front has scaled down in its operations and functions from the launch in 2014-2015. But we have the Johannesburg branch meeting on a regular basis every Wednesday. Trevor is one of the guys that's driving that. And we were saying earlier with Combat Ruth, the president, the deputy president of NUMSA, who left earlier, who was here, that the issues that are being raised here are typically the issues that the front should be taking up. You know, there's no reason. Because remember, the United Front resolution of NUMSA in 2013, and leaving COSATU or leaving the ANC or getting ourselves expelled or something like that. I'm joking. The other resolution talks about the communities and worker struggles, uniting those struggles, going back to the 80s. The clear resolution, but I mean, in terms of implementation and application, we have no budget on record of that, and maybe there's very little of that. Because the trade unions, and this is the point that I'm getting here, and which I know for years, involved with unions since the 80s, or the short-term jobs employed, if that's possible. The issue is workers and unions like to confine themselves on issues specific to workers. The mindset is so close on any other issue. I'm saying that's general experience I have in the trade union. It's about dismissal, it's about an increase, it's about bargaining, it's about working conditions. It's very, very short-termish and very short-sighted, which is an issue that we need to work around and try and resolve it. You asked about union, what retirement funds and union investments. Okay. It's quite important because, I mean, there's a lot of money there in the retirement fund industry, 3 trillion and above. And that money is used by the elites and the bosses and the capitalists and the administrators and all these other guys, actually, all of them. The workers have very little control or no control at all where it's getting invested. You know, and risky investment issues. So that discussion that conversation has to take place. What workers want is to see an investment. When you see the fund statement at the end of the year and stuff like that, those are the issues. You know, consumerism, that mentality, solidarity is not there anymore, being open about the community, about everybody else. So we have very serious challenges that we need to work around. I don't know, ask about an Eskom takeover. We think getting to the board is part of the takeover for the unions and the workers and communities in the manner that we want to direct the decision making, investment decisions and all those issues. Eskom is a big organization. I hear at the time when you're saying the revenue is not decreasing in Eskom. The revenue is increasing on a yearly basis. What decreases is is sales and demand, but the revenue, because of the high tariffs we pay, the revenue is maintained. They're happy with that, so it's not a class with them. They usually. So I'm saying Eskom is very the turnover there is around, or the revenue is around 177 billion a year. So yeah, we can't have that money to take over Eskom in terms of financial, but yeah. As organizations, we have the ability to do that, through the board and many other issues. Jai, is there any question now?
I think it's fine. Hameeda, you want to finish?
Hameeda?
And then Jane, get ready to announce any logistics issues or so.
Thanks. I think just in conclusion, you know, there was a competition bill that was presented to Parliament recently, and it's quite progressive. The Department of Socio-Economic Development actually tried to challenge the whole notion of monopoly and who owns capital in South Africa. And they've created quite a nice space for entrepreneurship. So I think in terms of taking your point around in relation to IPPs or entrepreneurship, or how do we actually enter spaces that we otherwise weren't able to. The competition bill, hopefully when it becomes an act, will facilitate the process. And I think when we're talking about money that's owned by trade unions, perhaps they can actually start investing in cooperatives and use the bill to actually facilitate that kind of transition. And then to be controversial with my comment, I don't think sitting on the board is going to help us. We've got unionists on boards. They get paid beautiful remittances for being on the board, and they do nothing for workers. The difficulty is when you're on the board, you go to the board meeting mainly for what you're going to get as opposed to the issues. There's also a conflict of interest. And yeah, well, who they're going to tell, because then they have to also account for the fact that they got the lovely honorarium. So there you go. Like you said, we've lost the edge. So I think to be honest to the comrade who posed the question is, I don't think workers have even begun to consciously realize that the potential of nationalization or even taking over something is a possibility. Because if you look to the leadership, it's about compromise, it's about engaging, it's about talking, it's about investments, it's about sitting on the board and trying to work from within. We are not in contestation mode. And I seriously wonder how many times the situation, how worse must the situation become? I think it was one of the European countries, there was a fuel increase recently, and every single motorist blocked the road, right? But they earn way more than what we earn. And we're going for that in how many umpteenth hike in both in petrol and in electricity. We haven't taken to the streets, and yet taking to the streets is our history. Right? So where's our resistance? Where's our sense of resistance? I mean, we can't still be delusional or suffering from the euphoria that the ANC is our party acting in our interest. It's not a working class party. And you know, I think we need to also get rid of the inertia. Because unless we get rid of the inertia, the onslaught will continue. And the loans, as you rightfully say, will continue to pay. And maybe the only thing that's working in our favor is the recession. Because eventually the working class will rise. and so we shall look towards the working class rising. So, come on.
Let's give a round of applause, comrades.